Truth is, I don't think people understood what it was I was doing at Schaefer. I wasn't there to conduct. Any fucking moron can wave his arms and keep people in tempo. I was there to push people beyond what's expected of them. I believe that is an absolute necessity. There are no two words in the English language more harmful than good job.
Hello again, everyone. It's Ruse here from the Practice Research Agency. And today, before we go into this, I want to start with something that I find both fascinating and a little uncomfortable. If you really pay attention to the numbers, they can completely change how you see what is going on. And every day I observe things around me. I'm one of those people where my profession and my life are intertwined. That just every day, all the time, I notice patterns around me, or maybe small details even, but in a sort of a pattern way. I can't help but ask, is this just my subjective experience? Is this something a little bit broader? And this is what research is, right? We sample, we analyze, we extrapolate. And I do that constantly, sometimes accurately, sometimes not. So most of the time I don't know because it's just stuff that I observe. But sometimes you see what feels like a pattern, but maybe it doesn't really exist in the real world, so to speak. Now, today, I want to talk about an observation that I've actually had for a long time, but I've never really gotten to the bottom of it. And for a long time, I didn't even know if it was actually true or something that I thought I was seeing in a certain time at a certain place, and it may or may not have had more validity in that regard. So I'm in Australia. I live in Sydney. And for years, I used to drive past one of the most academically selective public high schools in the city. I won't name it, but it's not because there's anything wrong at all, far from it. But it's just one of those schools that you sit an exam when you're in year six. How old are people in year six? 11 or 12. And in order to get into, in Australia, what we call, or New South Wales at least, what we call year seven, which is the beginning of high school. And that's where the selection process begins for these public, academically selective high schools. And this was one of the elite ones. This was one of the because there are a number of them, but this was one of the most famous ones. And every day I'd stop at the lights whilst the students crossed the road from the bus. And I noticed something, and I didn't notice it once. I didn't notice it occasionally. I noticed it consistently, that the overwhelming majority, let's say 80, maybe 90%, and I'm not really exaggerating, this is my experience, of the students getting off the bus and crossing the road were from Asian backgrounds. And I recognize these students, a lot from East Asian backgrounds, and a smaller proportion maybe from the South Asian backgrounds, what we would typically call Indian background, I guess, that area, right? And this was not a one-off impression. It was a repeated observation over the years. So I asked myself, is this just the students that commute? Am I seeing a very selective sample of students that are getting off the bus? Because that's what I'm seeing. And I'm laughing because that's highly unlikely, of course. But is this representative of this? Is this what's going on in the school? And I don't know because I've never been to, I've never been to that school, I can assure you. And my children have never been to that school. Okay. And beyond that, does this reflect something broader across all of the selective public school system? And I looked into it, and actually, it's not that easy to get precise numbers because we're not talking about, people born overseas. A lot of these students are born in Australia. They have an Asian background. Obviously, their parents have an Asian background, etc., etc. These are Australian kids, all right? They're going to Australian schools. By any definition of what we call Australian, these are Australian kids. But of course, like most Australians, probably from a different cultural background, okay? Now, it's not quite measured in that way. I think it's only measured sort of country of origin or country of birth. According to my school data, around 83% of students in Sydney's fully selective public schools come from a language background other than English. Right? So think about that. We're in Australia. These are English language schools, totally English language schools, modeled on an English education system, which is terrific. I'm not criticizing it. But the vast majority of the top performing academic students come from backgrounds that speak other than English. That is the first thing that really made me stop. When we look at it more specifically, and when we say non-English speaking background more specifically, when you narrow it right down, it really is Asian background, and particularly Chinese, of course, but also Korean, Indian, and also Vietnamese. So, for example, if you take, and this is not the school that I drove past, by the way, but if you take James Ruse Agricultural High School, consistently one of the top performing schools academically, it is often cited as having 97% of students from non-English speaking backgrounds or background speaking other than English. And realistically, that is really an East Asian dominated population there as well, obviously, especially Chinese. So let's compare that to the incidence of people from those backgrounds to the general population, right? In Sydney, around 15 to 20% of people identify as having an Asian ancestry in Sydney, because I'm trying to keep it to a microcosm at least of Sydney, and about 8, 9, 10, 11%, oh no, 8 to 11% are specifically a Chinese ancestry. It's a little bit vague here because it's ancestry, right? But those are the numbers, right? Those are the sort of the best official numbers. But in selective schools, it's anywhere from 70 to 90%. And as we've seen in some schools, almost the whole school of students are from Asian backgrounds, right? So what does that actually mean? That means that at an absolute minimum, that just even the most generous minimum, Asian background students are represented 3 to 5 times higher than their share in the population, 3 to 5 times higher. And in some cases, it's 7 or 8. And probably in some schools, it's 10 times. Let's break it down very simply. Roughly 1 in 6 people in Sydney are from an Asian background, but roughly 4 out of 5 students in selective schools are from a similar Asian background. They are the facts. These are such simple numbers and very easy to find. Now, before we go any further, I want to say this very clearly at this point. I personally look at those statistics and I have nothing but respect and admiration for the culture that has achieved this statistic. I respect it. I admire it. I am envious of it. Envy is not a good thing. It's one of the sins, okay? But I am envious of it. And to be honest, when I look at those numbers, there are only really 2 honest reactions in there, which is respect. I salute any culture that can do this, and self-reflection. Okay, and that's really it. It's respect of that culture, and I don't care where this culture's from. I don't even care at this point whatever anything else that they believe. Okay, this culture. Okay, so to speak. I'm just looking at these numbers, and these numbers are creating 2 honest reactions in me as a person who is not in from that culture, right? But lives very much amongst it, right? Okay. My honest reactions are respect and self-reflection upon me, my family, my culture, and so forth. What do we conclude from this? Here's the uncomfortable question. What's this about? Is this about intelligence? Is this what we're talking about here? Are we talking intelligence? Let's have an honest discussion about this, because these numbers are fairly extreme in the sense. And when I say extreme, I mean in a great way, right? In a great way for this particular culture, and in a way as an example to all of us. But is this about intelligence? Are students from English speaking, let's say European English speaking backgrounds, are we, I'm possibly one of them, I was one of them, are we less intelligent than those from those with an Asian background? That's really, come on, we've got to ask that question when you look at this number. How can you avoid asking this question? And it's not a nice question to ask, is it? But we've got to ask it. Now, I've actually asked this of people, and this is anecdotal. Like, I'm not done qualitative or quantitative research about this, although my God, what a topic. What a topic this would be. Who's going to pay for this topic, right? No one. So look, the most common answer I hear when I've asked people about this is they say, Oh, dude, yeah, I know people who call me dude, right? They just work harder. Their parents push them harder. And there's a negative framing a lot of the time. It's like they're overdoing it. You know what I mean? There's something abusive about it or something. Look, so think about that. Working harder and encouraging and instilling, and in fact, maybe even using a little bit of discipline to encourage children to see the merits of working harder, right? And even if they don't fully see the merits of working harder to begin with, to trust you as an older person that you know the merits of working harder and that they work hard now, that, right? So how is that overdoing it? How is working harder and encouraging your children to work harder a negative? I don't understand how that has become a negative in has that become a negative in our culture? This is what I'm forced to ask myself. Because if that is the case, then I feel sad for our culture if that's become a negative in our culture. Take someone like Tommy Emmanuel, the analogy, everyone knows who he is. That's why I'm using him, right? So the greatest steel string acoustic guitar player in the world. And if someone said to me, I say to someone, hey, how about that Tommy Emmanuel? Did you see that? And he said, oh, yeah, dude, he just practiced a lot, didn't he? It's like diminishing that achievement because he practiced a lot. Of course, he practiced a lot. That is the achievement. The achievement is the hard work. It is the hard work. It's like saying, oh, Andre Agassi or his wife, Steffi Graf, oh, yeah, they might have been the greatest tennis players for a while, but it's only because their dads really punished them to work on the tennis court their whole lives. They what? They had disciplinarian dads who pushed their kids to actually achieve the best that they could achieve in one of the most difficult and demanding sports in the world. Yeah, they trained intensely, but does that diminish their success? Absolutely not. How could it possibly diminish their success? In the real world, and this is what we're talking about now, not in some fantasy that the rest of us may have created about this world, but in the real world, no one discounts results because of effort. No one says, oh, you did too much work, so it doesn't count. Come on, that does not happen. That does not happen. It's the outcome that matters. It's the outcome that matters. There's another layer to this, that the peer environment, right? Of course, the peer environment gets spoken about a lot, but here's the thing about the peer environment. And when we talk about the peer environment, we're talking about culture, right? We're now talking about culture. Because once a pattern like this establishes itself, right, if you're in a cohort where there are high performance is the norm, where everyone is studying, pushing, aiming for top marks, that becomes the baseline. That becomes the baseline. So that's when the Asian comedians themselves, who are just often hilariously kind of lampooning their own culture, right? Which is what good comedy is all about a lot of the time. They talk about the A minus as the Chinese F, right? That's exactly what they're talking about here. What they're talking about here is that the benchmark for failure is you fail very easily in that culture. And now the pressure isn't just coming from parents, it's the entire culture, and it's powerful because now not performing stands out. Because see, this is the difference. Not performing stands out in that culture, whereas maybe in our culture, my culture, the opposite is true. That high performing stands out. So everyone's pretty sort of mediocre, and then the person who does they stand out. But this is no, this is different. This is now not performing stands out. So it's a high performance culture. Think about that.
There are no two words in the English language more harmful than good job.
What we might be seeing here isn't just necessarily individual effort. And that's what these detractors were telling me, right? Oh, dude, they just make them study so much, right? Referring to the parents, right? It's not just individual effort. It's not even necessarily just culture at a family level. It's the entire ecosystem. You get enough people with these behaviors in the one place, and these behaviors basically just amplify, and they amplify rapidly. Let's think about that, because we're constantly talking about how do we get high performance cultures in our school? How do we raise marks in our school? Why don't the policymakers who are looking at this look at the East Asian educational culture at home so they can get some pointers about how high marks are achieved at school? How about that? How about we take some pointers? We'll come back to that. We'll come back to taking pointers from high performance cultures and why this is so important. Let's look at the opposite of high performance, which is criminality. Okay, now I understand we've all watched Breaking Bad and criminality can be high performing, but come on, that's just entertainment. We're talking about the real world here, right? Let's look at criminality. Let's look at the very simple numbers. I love simple numbers. I love simple numbers. I'm suspicious of complicated numbers. I'm suspicious of complicated numbers because they're difficult to understand. You don't know what lies behind them. But these numbers are quite simple, and I love that. And because there's truth in simplicity. And this is really interesting. Let's look at criminality. Let's keep to our my little microcosm of Sydney. And around 20 to 15 to 20% of the population in Sydney is from an Asian background. Okay, we're not talking born in, background, right? Estimates, because we don't collect the data at this level in the prison system, and I'm not going to go into that, but the estimates suggest only 2 to 5% of the prison population in the same area is from an Asian background. So now we see the inverse pattern. We see the overrepresentation in academic achievement, underrepresentation in criminality. And that's not random. Which again, can I say, I salute you. I salute you. High academic performance and low criminality to this extent in this country, in the same country that I live in, right? How is this possible? How does this culture achieve this extraordinary number? It is an extraordinary number. If you look at the immigration pattern there, we're not talking about privileged Chinese kids from wealthy families and high educational status already getting it passed on through them, etc. We're talking about this has emerged from a largely low skill, or sorry, should I say not low skill? I shouldn't say that. Sorry, I should say skills that were not recognized in this country. So a Chinese school teacher could not be a school teacher here, a Chinese doctor could not be a doctor here, that sort of stuff, right? Okay, these were not necessarily low skilled people, but this country treated them as if they were low skilled people. Yeah, you want to talk resilience? Let's talk resilience. A professional comes to this country, knocked down, still you get ahead. The upward mobility into the next generation was so amazing. Resilience. You cannot keep a strong culture down. You cannot keep a strong culture down. You think about that. Rise even in amongst adversity, no help at all, yet rose to these heights. That's upward mobility. Okay? That is upward mobility, and that is resilience. Okay, so we start off working class, and if there is proper upward mobility and respect for education and discipline in the household and discipline and commitment and hard work instilled in the children as well, and they will move into professions such as the medicine, engineering, finance, law, or teaching, all of those things. Okay, it's not just about how much money you make, all right? It's also about the intellectual capacity of the professions, the intellectual capacities required to perform these professions, okay? But look at academic achievement, though. Academic achievement, it's like I say, chess is the only game where there's no luck, right? But no dice, no luck, all strategy, all moves. And I see academia in the same way. Now, you could say I lucked out, someone lucked out and they're smart at math. Someone lucked out and they got a photographic memory, a bit of a photographic memory. Someone lucked out and they did it. Okay, yeah, that happens. True. But I'll tell you something, an entire culture, that doesn't luck out. Individuals luck out. An entire culture lucking out, sorry, doesn't happen. So you look at, if you want to look at where a culture is going, right, not how much money it's going to make, not how much political influence it's going to make, but in terms of something like an academic sort of achievement or whatever that is standardized, that we can measure, that there are tests, all that kind of stuff, that's merit based, isn't it? That's merit. You don't fluke top marks. Like I said, individuals fluke top marks. No, they don't fluke the top marks. They just have a gift, so to speak. Individuals do, but not entire cultures. It's merit based. It is discipline, ecosystem of discipline and consistency. Okay. And when you see the same patterns repeated across education, behavior, outcomes, you got to ask, what's really going on, right? What is really going on, right? Yeah, this is the thing. Is this about intelligence of the individual, really, or is it about culture? Because saying one group is more inherently, what do you call it, racially, biologically, genetically intelligent than another one, that's just such a difficult argument. What about when it's en masse? What about when excelling is the norm? And what about when the behavior actually fits the expectation? What happened when the outcome fits the expectation? Because that's what we're seeing here. So culture, it's the culture shapes the behavior shapes the outcome. This is where I land in my own life. You try and surround yourself by people who are better than you in some way so that you can pick up their habits and learn things and you enjoy their company as well, right? Because they've got things to impart as well, right? So you learn from them, you observe them, you try and adopt. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Adopt, learn, observe, change, improve, progress. So shouldn't we be doing this at a broader level? In a multicultural society, shouldn't we be looking at different cultures and saying, what are they doing well? What can we learn from it? It's not it's not to compete even. Well, actually, no, we do want to compete. But I'm not talking about competing at an aggressive level. Compete in the sense that we all want to be better, right? So it's to improve because this is the power of data, right? A few simple statistics, they carry very deep meaning, they force questions, they challenge assumptions. People say a picture paints 1,000 words, and it's true, and 10 words in a poem paints an entire picture, yes, but numbers. There is God in the numbers as well. It's not just in the words and in the paintings and the music, there is God in the numbers. Numbers can actually change the way that you see the world. So that's it for today. Thank you for listening, and I'll speak to you again soon. Goodbye.